Hi, everyone. Hopefully everyone was able to join without issues. This is my first LinkedIn Live, so I hope you will all be very gentle with the process. And I really appreciate Natasha for joining me today. To give a little background about myself, I am a leadership and career development coach. I work a lot with women in tech and co-founders who are doing startups. So I work a lot with communication and mindset and confidence building, and the core of it is being human-centered. And hopefully everyone was able to join without issues. This is my first LinkedIn Live, so I hope. Wow. That was like in recording. Sorry, I'm going to turn that off over there. My background, I actually came out of the therapy world, so I have a lot of training in psychology, a lot of different therapeutic models, as well as NLP, and that is what I use in my practice to help people connect with themselves and be in that human-centered space and to connect with others more effectively. I'm going to let Natasha introduce herself, and then we will get started.
Love that introduction, Alexandria. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Natasha. I am based out of the San Francisco Bay Area. My background is primarily in HR, so I've done a variety of roles in HR, from talent acquisition to diversity, equity, and inclusion and performance management. I'm also a certified professional coach, primarily working within the performance and leadership space. So love talking to people about how to maximize their full potential, maximize their performance at work and in life so they can live with more passion and fulfillment and purpose. So definitely I've worked with clients that are looking to navigate back into the workforce or making big changes in their careers or in their personal life. So thank you for having me today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for being willing to do this with me, and off on an adventure we are.
Yeah, I love it.
Okay, so I think a lot of our alignment is very much in like the career and like how do you actually align self with what you're doing. And we spend so much time working in our lives that it's super, super important for people to be aligned with what they're doing, because otherwise there's lots of detrimental effects that can come out that a lot of people don't even realize. Your health gets affected, your relationships are affected, it just everything can be affected by a poor work environment or not being in full alignment with work. And so the first thing that we want to talk about is finding what you value and defining the ideal work life. Do you want to start talking about why you would even want to find value in aligning your work life?
Totally. I think if you can't figure out why you work or how you view work, it's really hard to figure out what your truth is, what your career path would be. So when I talk to people about their ideal career or what does leadership mean to them, I try to break it down into different components to help them understand, because that's a really big question, right? To be like, what is your career and why do you work? Because usually the answer is, I have bills to pay. Like I have bills to pay and I needed a job, and that's true, right? We all need to work for money, but to think about it more deeply and to realize that there's so many components of career. What does fulfillment mean to you? Because that really matters. I think there are plenty of studies that show that job satisfaction is like the number one priority for people. So if you're not happy in your job, as you were mentioning, it adversely impacts all the other aspects of your life. So breaking down, what does your career vision look like? What does fulfillment look like to you? What does achievement look like to you? How do you communicate? What does productivity look like for you? It's really important, because then you're kind of working on autopilot, right? You're kind of living your life on autopilot, which can be easy sometimes, depending on what chapter you're in and what's going on. But if you really want that job satisfaction, who you are and what you do need to be fully aligned. So I try to emphasize that importance when I'm speaking to my clients.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think that being in touch with self is something that is becoming a lot more prevalent. And I am really enjoying the conversations that are happening right now about aligning self and job satisfaction, and it being more than just a paycheck or it being more than just a title, because going through and just chasing a title or chasing a dollar amount, while it could solve some things, right? Like, sure, money doesn't buy happiness, but it sure does make it a lot easier to focus on what does bring you happy, right? If you don't have to worry about where you're living or what you're eating or any of those pieces, you have some needs that are met to open up a space to focus on other things. And so then the value alignment becomes huge, because sure, you could chase a paycheck, but if it doesn't align with your values, are you happy doing that every day, right? If you are somebody who doesn't believe in war or doesn't believe in guns, but then you're going to work for a government contractor who is building bombs, that's a huge misalignment and will cause cognitive dissonance that you then have to reconcile every day. And that's exhausting to do versus being aligned with your career and being excited to go to work and enjoying the impact that you're having on the world. Humans like to be value adders. And so being able to align our careers with our values allows us to have a much bigger impact on the world, which leads to overall satisfaction with life, in my opinion.
Totally agree. Totally agree. There's one thing that you said, or using that example, the guns and then working for a government contractor. When you feel, so in my core energy coaching practice, we talk about the influencers on energy. Mm-hmm. And one of them is spiritual and another one is emotional. So when you feel that dissonance that you described, what actually happens is your potential for maximizing your performance, it decreases because there's something negatively impacting your energy, whether it be that misalignment in what you value, or just feeling like your emotional needs and desires are just not being met at work because it's just, it's not in alignment. So not only will you be unhappy, but you actually will not be doing your best every day because things are not in alignment. And that leads to engagement and productivity, retention for employers. So many different levers get impacted because of those things.
Yeah, 100%. I really like what you actually said about connecting it back to the ROI for the business, because there's a lot of things that people connect to. They're like, oh yeah, that sounds great in some magical utopia. And you're like, yeah, but it's like for real and will definitely affect your business because yeah, the retention numbers right there and recruitment opportunities and being able to have the productivity levels that you need and want. If employees aren't engaged and they aren't satisfied, then they're not being as productive or as effective as they could be. And you may not even understand or begin to realize how much money you're leaving on the table or losing due to that lack of engagement because you aren't investing in your people and you aren't putting them first. If you put your people first, then they get to show up in their fullest and in their genius every day, which means they show up in their fullest for your customers and for that product. And you get to have the innovation and the thoughts and the ideas that are coming from them that could blow up your business in a way that you couldn't even have dreamed of.
Probably can't even put numbers to. You can try to forecast and project, but bringing your genius every day, bringing your best self, bringing your whole self to work. Yeah, I think that would just leaps and bounds would help our businesses. So
absolutely. Because like as an executive, as a founder, you're limited to your own brains, right? We all are. That's a human limitation, is we are limited by our own creativity and experiences that lend itself to that. And when we create a team that shows up in their genius as well, we've become a hive mind in a sense that we get to have the experience and innovation and creativity of the entire team. I can't have all the answers for my business. And so I need somebody else to come in and say, hey, have you thought about? Because the amount of times I've had people say that to me and I'm like, no, but that sounds amazing. I got so excited for this. Yeah. And being able to set our egos aside, I think, is a big hurdle to that, but vital to creating businesses that solve the interesting big problems that we have today. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, completely agree. As you were speaking, I was thinking of like the three major things that I think leaders need in order to cultivate and maximize the genius and innovation of their team. It's understanding the strengths of their people. So really getting to know their people and knowing what they're good at, what their gifts are, how do they best serve, and tapping into them when you need that type of help and creativity and ideas. I think it's also being an inclusive leader, right? Like if you don't have that emotional awareness or competency to build trust in your group and in your team so that folks can be transparent, share their best ideas, they have a space to really do that, that's really the only way you can even see those ideas through. And the third one I would say is feedback. So having a leader that wants constant feedback, not in a way that, it becomes mindless chatter and they just start to ignore the feedback and they don't, operate with any of the feedback, but to know that they are receiving that feedback, taking it in and trying to action on it, because then their people, their managers, the levels below them will see, okay, my voice does matter. And what I have to say, it's being held accountable by my leader because he's seeing it or she is seeing it, they're hearing it, and they're doing something about it. So understanding strengths, having that inclusive mindset and that emotional awareness to cultivate trust in your workspace, and then providing and having those opportunities for feedback are really key for leaders.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, everything you just said, yes, all check. One thing that came up for me just now when you were talking about that is a conversation actually I had yesterday with one of my clients, and they were talking about some frustrations that they were having with their current leader, and everything that she said, there was just so much in creating trust and why that is so important. And that everything that you just said is huge to creating trust and being able to have a team that is cohesive and collaborative. And one of the things that she was really frustrated with was there wasn't any sort of transparency or the feedback response. And so she didn't trust her leader because she was like, hey, I don't know what's going on. My feedback is not being heard. I see all these decisions being made from the top down that I don't agree with or align with. Yeah. And one of the things that she had expressed, if she just had the opportunity to be heard in the process, even if the same decision was made, being able to have input in it would have allowed her to feel like she was having more impact and that she was respected on the team. And it's those things that don't just have feedback sessions for the sake of feedback sessions so that you look like you're actually interested. Yeah. Really listen and take that feedback in, because there could be ideas that you haven't thought of that could make the project or the company or the fill in the blank with what you're trying to resolve way more successful.
Absolutely. I mean, it's the importance of engagement surveys, right? Probably your clients probably feeling less engaged, less valued, and that trickle down effect will have large ripples. It's hard because I think people first have difficulty giving honest feedback because no matter what, even if it's an anonymous survey, everyone's worried, is this really anonymous? Will there be any retaliatory things that are going to happen to me? But I think it comes down to creating a culture and processes and procedures that allow for that feedback to be formalized, to be acted upon, to even just have their voice heard. Absolutely. I completely agree, because as leaders, you can't have your ears and your eyes everywhere. There are people on the ground and you need to know what's happening there in order to support your business, in order to move your business forward. So completely agree with you.
Yeah, 100%. You also just brought up a really interesting one, that trust factor in, if I'm honest here, will I get in trouble? And that's why it's super, super important to create that psychological safety and that trust culture within your organization. And even doing that, there's going to be hesitation, because at our core, as humans want to be liked, humans want to be a part of the community. And so saying anything that could be perceived as negative or bad, that's also cultural in the United States, right? It's rude. But then there's an element that if you don't say something, then you can't be heard. So almost the element of see something, say something, and stand in that bravery, because you may be wanting to say something that somebody else is also too afraid to say. And you may have more support than you realize. So say it. And if there is retaliation, if there is those things, then that tells you a whole lot about your organization that you wanted to know anyway. And the opportunity to find an organization that will support you, that does want those things. So either way, it can be beneficial, even if it's scary.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it goes back to the mindset that everything is an opportunity. Absolutely everything. You're learning something, it's knowledge, helping you make a big decision. It's all just information. I think being a voice to many, there are so many people, and I think we've talked about this a little bit in terms of the diversity lens, from different cultures, different genders, you know, where they do feel like their voice is stifled and they can't seem to let it out. So being that spokesperson and being able to be a voice for many, yeah. So standing in your bravery, I love that. I'm going to take that. Standing in your courage, super, super important.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so we got a little bit off track, but that was a really great conversation. But let's realign with the bullet points, because that's why people said that they wanted to come today. So we wanted to talk about the different challenges from the executive to manager to IC, or individual contributor. And there's lots of differences. And I think that people really need to understand what the differences are moving through each of those spaces, because they may not be value alignment for you, and you don't know until you're already in that position. So I really like to have people be transparent about why do you want to be in leadership. Because if you're going after a paycheck or you're going after power, it's not going to be a good time for you, because the stress and the differences, if you are a really super powerful individual contributor, you may lose all the pieces that you enjoy about your work life by moving into leadership. And so making sure that that's something you really want to take on, I can't stress enough how important it is. What are your thoughts?
Completely agree. I think about a lot of individual contributors, especially what happens in cultures that are heavy promotion cultures. Everyone goes for manager. Everyone wants to be a senior manager. Everyone just wants to move through the ranks. It starts to drown out your own voice, which is why it's so important that we talked about that first point of, what do you value? Why do you work, right? Because if you don't know what that is, you start to make decisions based off of what you're seeing, what you're hearing, basically inheriting other people's views as your own. And then you can't distinguish which one's yours and which ones are theirs. And so when individual contributors, when they're getting to that stage where they're like, okay, I'm kind of getting bored in my role and I feel like I'm ready for the next thing, but I don't know, should I do the manager thing? Everyone's doing it. This is really key for organizations. I mean, I think you and I are on the same page. If we could coach at every level of an organization, I think that would be ideal, because these conversations are like forks in the road. It's what really matters. But organizations need to have more transparent career paths ready to go for people who are at that stage, because a lot of folks, like, that's where the retention statistic starts to change. People start to think, if this is my max, I better leave, because I don't want to be a manager. But there are so many other ways to grow in your career, right? There's like job rotation, so you can rotate through different business groups and to understand and get new perspective. There's job redesigns where you can add more scope to your role, and you're not necessarily just like more work is being dumped on you necessarily, but the breadth and depth of your role is strategic, and you start to grow in that way. I think if you can't figure that out, and if you can't, as an individual contributor, spend that time understanding your unique value add, see how the organization, as it's making changes, if you can't see your path, that's not manager, it makes a lot of sense why people would leave. And so coaching around those things, understanding your value, when changes happen, shifting into a mindset of, how is this organizational change happening for me instead of happening to me? I think all of those things help you be more at choice, so that, again, you can go back to that voice of, what do I really want in my career? So that's just from the individual contributor perspective, in my opinion.
No, I think that that is absolutely true. And even in management, that rings true, because there's, team lead, there is like department manager, there's director, and then you start to get into higher than that, depending on the organizational structure of your company and how large it is and how many layers there are. There could be something else before you get into like the VP and executive suite in that realm. And those all come with very different responsibilities, very different focuses, and ways that you're spending your time, and the way you're thinking, that it may not be in your area of genius, and it may not be aligned with what you like to do, or what you get from work or how you want to be. So I think all of those, the same things that you need to consider at that IC level, and what does depth look like, or what does expansion look like? You may want to just go up and be a team lead. That may be your area of satisfaction and where you find a lot of joy. Much higher than that, it may be more stressful than you want, or work that you don't like, or fill in the blank with it, whatever it could be. But sitting in that, oh, well, if I don't go up, then I'm not successful, I think that that's a really harmful narrative that 100% needs to be tossed out, because it's just not accurate. It's just not true.
Yeah. And you're going to lose out on really great employees who are really great at what they do, and maybe are specialized in ways that are hard to find in the market. Like, you want to be able to keep those people, and you want to be able to have those transparent conversations. I think that's when it comes down to not only the transparency of the organization and the career path, but also really good managers. It is hard. And managers versus, executives versus leaders, I think they all share the same competencies, which is being able to have honest conversations with your people so that they can feel heard, and knowing your organization well enough that you can give them answers. Because the worst thing is, you come to your manager and you have the courage and you've talked yourself up that you're going to have a serious conversation about your career, and then they're like, yeah, I don't really know what to do with that information. And it's like, okay, I mean, yes, you can always work with your manager to figure out what's next, but it's, the organization and leadership need to also educate and empower and enable their managers to know enough about the organization and to know what career paths are viable for their people. So building trust is truly like the theme here. It's like, how do you build trust as a leader throughout your organization? What's your culture? What are your values like? What are the behaviors you want people to exhibit? And then as managers, how do you live that every day and exhibit that with your individual contributors? So building trust really matters.
Absolutely. Absolutely, it does. So I want to focus a little bit more on the actual practical differences between each of those different levels. And so I want to talk specifically first about the IC into management as a whole, because I think that there's some major things that people miss about moving in or away from IC and into management. And a few of the big things that I think are your KPIs, your metrics, your level and measurement of success is so ambiguous and murky once you get into the leadership realm. It's not nearly as clear as when you're an IC. So when you're sitting in the IC role, you know what your productivity needs to look like. You know what's expected of you. You have deliverables that are really easy to act upon. You have your metrics and your KPIs all just like right there. Super easy, right? It can just check, 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 check. I know what I'm doing every day. Like, I got this. And there's a lot of autonomy that comes in that to a point. Whereas in leadership, you end up having to create your own autonomy, your own metrics, your own KPIs. And there's a little bit of swimming in muddy water. Like, I think I'm doing this right. And that's where it becomes super important for clarity of communication all the way from the top through the organization of what are we doing? Where are we going? So as the leader who is creating metrics for self and for my team, am I accomplishing the business strategy? Was there clarity coming from the top that I even know how I need to organize my team to accomplish what it is that we're trying to do? And how do we fit in with the other departments and support one another to make sure that we're all going to the same place? Because it's all a team, right? We all affect one another. AP affects HR, and that affects technology, and that affects finance, and all making those decisions. But we're also a little bit siloed making our own decisions. So that murkiness can be overwhelming and stressful for people because they don't have that direct, this is what we're doing, this is how we're focusing. And as an IC, you may have the opportunity to create those goals with your leader, but they're also easier to create because you have a much smaller scope of what you're attempting to create.
Mhm.
Another big difference that I think people miss out on is that feedback loop. When you're an
Yeah.
individual contributor, you have a really short feedback loop. And every time you create a deliverable, every time you show up in a different capacity, you have the opportunity for feedback. Where in leadership, you have to go actively seek that feedback, and you have a much longer time that you have to wait for something, because your success matters on the full delivery of the project or the product making it to market, which could be 6 months or a year, versus the individual contributor in the tech world specifically. You have 2 to 4 week sprints that you get feedback on all the time. And so if you need constant feedback to be aware or to grow or to know, you may not get that as a leader. And that could be really uncomfortable for somebody. So knowing your alignment and needs for that. What are some other differences that you see moving into leadership out of IC?
Yeah. I mean, so just going from IC to manager, I think the power and understanding how to delegate is probably one that, and I kind of mentioned that earlier, understanding the strengths of your team, because once you get to that manager level, you can't do it all, right?
Mhm.
That role clarity starts to get a little more murky, as you described. So figuring out what you can do, what you can't do, and maximizing efficiency and effectiveness through that is where you'll find success. So I think that's a huge one. For leaders, I mean, you talked about all the main points. I would say, like, because leaders are so strapped for time, there are four main buckets that really take up most of their time. It's building the business at scale. It's understanding the most cutting edge technology, what's new in the market, how can you grow the business. It's grooming the next generation of leaders. So that goes back to transparency and working with HR, understanding performance and competencies and all those things. And then now I'm forgetting the fourth one. I had the fourth one. It was managing relationships. So getting that buy-in, working on image and brand. So I think, just as you were describing, having a longer feedback loop, defining what's important for the business, the objectives, the strategy, the mission of the organization, where are you hoping to go in the next 3 to 5 years? Defining those will help you then prioritize where you put your time. And then that'll help you delegate to the managers and leaders below you. And then that'll help them manage and lead their individual contributors below them. So it always starts at the top. I feel like that's another theme. It all starts at the top, being clear, being transparent, really just laying out the vision for the organization. It's super key at the top. So yeah.
Yeah, another thing that just came up when you were talking about those things is the delegation, 100%, that's huge. And you also talked about keeping up with the new technology. And I would push on that a little bit, because I think the job of a manager or the leaders are to know what new technology is coming out. But as a spanning leader, you have this area of expertise that is across everything, right? So it ends up kind of being an inch deep and a mile wide. And you really depend on your direct reports to be the depth of the knowledge. And so it's really empowering your team to go after the new knowledge, to bring it to you and say, hey, we have this new technology that we want to try on this thing. What do you think? And really creating opportunities for them to spend time learning new technology, to spend time being able to go find new solutions and new technology, and then being able to remove bottlenecks and obstacles that would stand in their way from implementing those new things. So you don't end up being the expert, because being an expert leader, you pigeonhole yourself really, really quickly. And so if you pride yourself on being a super in-depth expert on something, moving into leadership, especially the higher up you get into leadership, you don't get to keep up that way anymore. Your time to focus in on that deep dive learning doesn't exist, because now your time is spent in meetings, creating the clarity, creating the opportunities, and really focusing in on what the business needs and how you empower your individual contributors to show up in their area of genius to accomplish all of the things that need to happen.
100% agree. You need subject matter experts on your team to be able to give you the specialized information that you just don't have time. You don't have time to get the new certificate. You don't have time to learn all the new technology. So, and it goes back to being able to build a strong team behind you is probably one of the biggest factors for your success as a leader, because you can't do it all. It's all collaboration. It's all teamwork. Yeah. So agree. I love the mile wide and inch deep. That's just like a little bit of everything.
Yeah. So. And I think the other thing that comes up there for people really big is the ego. The ego shows up, especially if you were at the top and that's how you got promoted, was you were that subject matter expert. And you are so used to being the expert in your field to move into leadership. And now you are expected to control or manage or make decisions on all of these things that you have very little knowledge of, or you realize, like, let's just talk about the tech space, right? Because that's where my perspective is coming from. If you've been a really solid coder your whole life and you can just like turn out code like nobody's business and you can find the errors and you're super good at QA or fill in the blank with that, and then you move into leadership and now you're making decisions about performance and team members leaving or coming on, or like what are we focusing on next, it can, and you see your team surpassing you in knowledge and capability, that can really push on that ego and be like, oh, am I showing up for my team the way I should? I should know more than them, and like all the shoulds show up. And instead of sitting in, my skill set is different. They are the subject matter expert in fill in the blank for the team. And it is my job to make sure that they don't have anything standing in their way for them to do better than I could, because I can't do everything. So I need to clear the road for everybody to do their magic.
It becomes a new chapter of your career. When you shift out of that individual contributor to manager, the expectations are different. And so if it's no longer aligning, like that's a good point to kind of check in and reevaluate with yourself. Am I still happy being in this role where I don't have that time, as you mentioned earlier, to do the things that I was really passionate about that got me to this space? Because if the answer is no, then you have to think about, well, what else is there for me? And if the answer is yes, then you're able to reframe the ego. You're able to reframe that disappointment, that feeling like you've lost your special power, but you're growing other powers. You're growing your leadership capability, because this is the chapter, this is the space, this is the role that needs that. So it's all reframing.
Yeah, I agree. It is all reframing. And again, checking in with that alignment, like you just said, super important at that level, because being able to learn new things and grow in your area of expertise may have been the passion area and is the true alignment for you. You may not be interested in growing in your people skills or your ability to lead or move obstacles. That may not be interesting at all, even though you can do it, because I believe anybody can do it.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that you should be doing it, because it doesn't align, which leads to the difference between managing and leading. I have a spicy opinion that I am confused, I think, why more people don't jump on board, but you should be managing tasks, not people.
Oh my God. Yes. That was going to be the quote that I was thinking of. You manage, you lead people. I think Grace Hopper said that. So yes, continue what you were going to say.
No, I mean, go with that. Like, talk about it more, because that's 100% it.
Yeah, you manage processes, procedures, you manage your time, you manage tasks, you manage productivity. But when it comes to people, so first, before I even get into that, a lot of people say, well, I'm not a leader. I'm not in a senior position. I'm not an executive. I don't have a team below me. My definition of a leader is if you do anything in your day-to-day that impacts or influences other people, you're a leader. So don't cut yourself short, and realize the power that you have in that and stand in that. So you have the power to build trust, to whenever you're building rapport with a new teammate, right? You're showing some sort of leadership capability in that. So leaders are in charge of motivating, inspiring, being forward-looking, thinking about the future, visioning. So truly, it's you manage tasks, you manage productivity, but you lead people and you build and you innovate and you create as a leader. So completely agree.
Yeah, and the space that you're creating as the leader is the opportunities for your team to show up in the process, in the procedure, in the doing of the things.
Yeah.
But standing over them, breathing down their neck, did you do it? Did you do it? Did you do it? No, that's boring, that's awful, that's terrible. We're all adults. Stop. Micromanaging? Absolutely not. Like, that is not okay. And the leading piece needs to come from, you have an area of genius. What do you need from me to stand in your magic, to show up 100% in your area of genius? Because we need it. What will it take for you to share that with us? That is the mindset that you want to be in. And using your team who is doing the work to create the process, to create the procedure, to tell you what productivity actually looks like and what's achievable. Because there is also an element that I've come across executives that are like, oh, I'm going to set these just outlandish goals and I'm just going to press, and like my expectations are so high. And I'm like, I mean, yes, have high expectations, because humans like to rise to the occasion. We very much want to get up to that level. Right. And when you set really unrealistic expectations, you're going to get looks like, who do you think is going to do that, and with what resources? Yeah. And then you cause disengagement and lack of trust, and people don't show up in their magic, and you don't get all the return on investment that you could if you just created space for people to show up in their magic, because they don't have roadblocks and they have all the resources that they need, and they have clarity of communication, because all of those pieces have to be there for people to be able to show up. You can have really high expectations, but if you're not clear, how do they know what they're supposed to be doing?
Totally. I mean, just by you asking the question, right? Just asking the question, because yeah, we're all adults. We all know the things we like, the things we don't like. And if you don't, you eventually learn, because you try enough things in life that you figure it out. So by asking the question, what do you need from me in order to do your best work? It's as simple as that, because leaders, I mean, you don't have to guess. You could literally just ask. And I think understanding and having that emotional competency, again, actually leading with human-centric language is also really key. It's the way you ask questions. It's the way you phrase the expectations you have for your team. All those little micro things matter. And that's how you cultivate trust and engagement and productivity. It's by being that inclusive leader and showcasing that you trust your people to do the job, and you're there to give them the resources, to give them that support. But then going back to managing, that's when people are still building their own skills. That's when you need to delegate and you need to be really clear. But once people have established their credibility, they can do the job. You lead from there. You don't have to manage, you just fully lead from there. So there's a time and place for each of these buckets of managing versus leading.
Sure. And I really like what you said about ask. That is common sense and not common practice. And that is one of the things that I push so hard with all of my clients. Like when they come to me with struggles or frustrations, and like, did you ask? Did you ask what you needed? Did you ask what they needed? Did you have a conversation for value alignment between the two of you so that you can both have your needs met? And I'm a huge proponent of nonviolent communication and speaking in that language of needs and showing up in the, hey, I'm a human and I have stories and I have feelings and I have needs, and here's what's coming up for me. Are you interested in helping me? Because I also want to help you. What do you need? And asking the same question back, and everybody being able to get what they need. What motivates them? What demotivates them? Well, let's lessen what demotivates and increase what motivates. One person's area of genius and just like passion could be somebody else's bane of their existence. Don't make this person do the thing that they hate. Let them do the thing that they love.
It sounds so simple, doesn't it? But there's just so many other things that get in the way. You mentioned another thing about when you set expectations so high, no one wants to be a part of that, because no one wants to be set up to fail. And I mean, it's not like the leader comes in thinking that, but when you're so focused on performance with one goal in mind, instead of thinking with a more complete holistic view of what achieving that looks like for your team, you're going to get that lack of engagement, that lack of productivity, and people don't want to burn out. I think, especially, I'm happy we haven't mentioned the whole pandemic during this entire time, but that's been a huge factor in how we work in the workplace. People are tired. People are really tired. So to set goals that are completely unreasonable, it's just, no, please don't do that. Like, it's just, that's a recipe for disaster. So
100%. And also, speaking of burnout, not making sure that your employees are satisfied and not making sure that your employees are engaged, those are both recipes for burnout. Because if you're just going off of engagement, people like to show up. People like to be valuable. And sure, you can 100% capitalize on that early newness of somebody just being rearing to go and excited about a position. But if you don't have a baseline of employee satisfaction in your organization, you are going to turn and burn. And it's not going to be a good time for anybody.
Exactly. It's important to understand what are the contributors to that baseline, and if it's low, what is the low hanging fruit? What can you do easily to change that? And there can be multiple things that go into that. So, yeah.
And again, ask your employees, what do they need? What satisfies them? Because job satisfaction, it's not a magic bullet. There is not one way to guarantee satisfaction. So what does that look like for your team, for your company, for your people?
Totally, completely.
The last piece that we wanted to talk on, the difference between performance management and development coaching.
Yes. So when I think about performance management, I think it can be really reactive, right? It's usually when we have an employee who is not measuring up to expectations, and we find out about it a month or 2 months in, depending on when that performance season occurs, because as much as we want feedback to be ongoing, it doesn't always happen. You're busy in the grind every day. And you find out and you think, okay, what do we have to do? What techniques do they have to learn to bridge the gap between their knowledge, skills, and abilities here and meeting the expectations of the role here? And so it could be, and then a plan gets in place, and the whole thing just sounds really scary. So I'm a big fan of proactive performance management. And you think of managing performance, I mean, performance leadership, right? Like, you don't want to be able to manage, I guess you're managing performance, but you want to be able to look at performance as the most optimum for an individual, not just, okay, I want to hit expectations, but what can we look at as a whole of that person and their career and where they're at in life, and how can we level them up holistically? So not just their performance, but them as a person. So when you're looking at performance management versus, let's say, development coaching, that is more focused on the entire individual. What belief systems do they have about themselves? And it can feel very woo-woo, especially in an organization. It's like, I don't want to hear what this person's belief system is, but believe it or not, it's the way they think, the way they feel, that changes how they show up at work. So it could be, the performance is they're just not skilled in this area and they're having to, upskill in this technology. Okay, so you just give them to training. But what if they have imposter syndrome, right? We've talked about what imposter syndrome is. What if they have all these other factors that it's not just they need to learn this new skill or obtain this new knowledge. It's something else that's stopping them from maximizing their full potential and their full performance at work. So I think coming at it from a more complete view, a more holistic view, that's where the magic is. Things like career pathing and knowing an organization's overall career path framework that's really important when you're having those conversations about performance, about what's next. It's, okay, what are my strengths? First you want to do a self-assessment and you want to understand what your strengths are, what you're good at, what did you achieve in the time of, or the frame of time that you're evaluating your performance, and getting that feedback from people. How do they think you did? Because it's one thing to assess yourself and you're thinking you have this image and you've accomplished all these things, but to someone else, it might not be what's coming across. And then developing an action plan. So what knowledge, what training, what skills, and then understanding if you hit all those things, what's next for you? Is it that lateral move that we were talking about? Because it doesn't always have to be vertical. Is it a lateral move? Is it becoming more specialized as a subject matter expert in something else? So I think it's combining performance management, development coaching. All levels of an organization deserve development coaching, and career pathing, actually having a framework and a career path ready to go for each and every person. There's a stat that says that, I think it's when coaching is offered to organizations, the organizations are twice as likely to have employee tenures of 7 years or more. Like that's a retention stat right there. Attraction, retention, engagement, productivity. So it's combining all those things allows people to do their best work.
Well, and having the opportunity, like you said, lateral moves or moving around also allows people to stay longer, because if you have people who need to be challenged all the time, then you give them a new challenge to take on and they don't have to leave your company to do it. And now you get to reap the rewards of upskilling or cross-skilling somebody in a way that excites them and motivates them to continue to show up in the same capacity all the time. Like I know some people who have stayed at companies for 20 years, but they've done 30 different jobs, right? Because they have the opportunity to move around and up and down and sideways, whatever it is that they're wanting to do in that moment. I think that's important. And the performance management with the development coaching, like they're hand in hand, and they should be offered to everybody at every level. You have a lot of executive coaches out there and it limits it to the C-suite. But there's so many opportunities for coaching and development up until that point that people are losing out on because some companies aren't offering it. I love that the companies that are offering it, having those statistics to show that people will stick around if you invest in them. That's the whole point of human-centered leadership. Invest in your people so that they can invest back in you.
Absolutely. I mean, we're not robots, right? I think in a strong capitalistic society, it starts to feel that way, that you're just a cog in a machine, and it might feel faster to operate in that way. Just get your job done and clock out at 5. But everyone's only doing half of what they're capable of when you're operating in an organization like that. It feels great in the short term, but it's just not sustainable. It's not. Like, organizations will break apart, people will leave, and you're just losing out on the genius of people. You're losing out on the genius of people when you're not asking the right questions, listening to their feedback, acting upon their feedback. It's all super important. All the things combined. It's all what's the word I'm trying to use? They intermingle. Yeah. So
I agree with you. So I really love this conversation, and I would like to give people in the audience an opportunity to ask questions. If anybody has any, you can type them in the chat and let us respond to them. I'd be more than happy to answer anything specific. While we're waiting for some of those to come in, do you feel like there's anything that we didn't chat about today that you really want to make sure that people hear?
For me?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I'm sorry, I was checking all the messages. I don't think so. I think we talked about a lot of great topics that concern all levels of the organization. I think probably one of my favorite things, just because we probably didn't have, there wasn't the right topic to really discuss this, but when you think about performance, and maybe this could be more applicable to sports or to an actual artistic performance, but I like to think about this just as through performance, like for public speaking. A lot of the times people judge themselves when they don't measure up to the performance that they expected for themselves. So let's say you are doing your first big presentation on something, and your goal is to just knock it out of the park. It's to say, okay, I know every single topic. I memorized every single slide. I had every single note. My intonation was on point. I was making eye contact. I could answer every question. And if you don't hit all those things at the end of the presentation, you beat yourself up. You're like, I am the worst. You label yourself as, I can never public speak again. Not to me, like that, there's a reason why that's like the number one fear for people besides like heights and claustrophobia. But if you can learn to shift your mind and consciously choose what success means in the moment, and you can apply this to life, you will be more satisfied, more fulfilled, and you'll have more of that growth mindset in whatever you're doing. So if you shifted into, okay, if I didn't hit all the notes, or if I didn't memorize every slide, as long as I'm making eye contact or I'm able to not stumble through what I'm saying, and if you start to falter on those, plan C would be, okay, you know what? If I can just walk away from this presentation learning something, whether it be about myself or my audience, and it adds to my path of growth, it's success. So I bring that up because I think a lot of the times humans are so quick to judge themselves as good or bad, or they're quick to say, I can't do something, I won't do something. And it's going back to that growth mindset, but it's having more of that conscious choice in the moment. It's like, how do you apply that growth mindset in the here and now when something is actually happening and you're seeing yourself slowly? It's like an out-of-body experience. You're like, oh my gosh, I am just starting to crumble. So that's just one of my favorite things that I've learned recently, is just being able to reevaluate, refocus in the moment so that you define success for yourself.
Yes. It's all stories. They're all stories, and we're telling them to ourselves. So make sure you're telling yourself one that's empowering and helpful and will actually serve you. Jay, I really appreciate your question. So you asked about mentioning nonviolent communication, and if I can say a little bit more about it with some definitions. And so nonviolent communication is a form of communication that was really brought up in the framework really created by Marshall Rosenberg. He is one of my personal heroes. He was a very lovely human. And the principles of nonviolent communication is speaking in a language of needs and not speaking from a place of judgment or assumption. And so there's oftentimes in our culture that we use I feel when we're not actually talking about a feeling. We're talking about a thought or a perception. And differentiating between a feeling and a thought is hugely important, because having a thought, we can say, hey, I'm having this thought and this is what the story is and what's being brought up for me, but that's not a feeling. A feeling is an actual emotional experience, like a physical sensation that's happening. So anger, sadness, happiness, joy, those pieces, where a thought that we attach to feelings sometimes is attacked, abandoned, neglected. Those are all assumptions of somebody's intention that puts others on the defensive, and it shuts down the conversation and opportunity to connect. Whereas if you say, hey, I am feeling sad right now because I'm having this thought that you're not interested in engaging with me on this project. And that's also leading to some other feelings of frustration. I have a need for collaboration and for cohesiveness between us. Would it be possible for you to do X, Y, and Z to show that you're interested in collaborating on this? Or is this true? Is there any element of truth to this? And asking the person if they are having the same experience, because sometimes we can get in our head and tell some really ridiculous stories that have zero foundation in reality, because we've decided our thoughts are real and reality. And so like, that's true for everybody, but they're not. You and I can be in the same room and have two completely different experiences of the same thing. And being able to have that conversation with one another, what we took away, allows us to create more empathy and connection and opportunities to have our needs met, which is all we're ever trying to do. We're always trying to get our needs met, but we have to be aware of the needs, what we're feeling, and the stories that are either adding to or taking away from the opportunity for that. Does that help clarify that a little bit for you, Jay? Or does that bring up any questions for you, Natasha, or thoughts?
I just love it. I mean, the thing, like immediately as you were phrasing and giving that example, it's like the defenses just slowly lower, right? Anything that might have created animosity or a defense, or the other person already like, okay, is that your argument? Okay, well, I'm going to gear up for my argument now.
Yeah.
It's gone because the awareness that you have and the phrasing of how you said it, making it about your thoughts, your feelings, and owning up that it could be assumptions that you're making, and owning up to the fact that it's just perceptions. At the end of the day, things in life, we label things as good or bad. We label our performance as good or bad. We label situations as good or bad. But nothing is good or bad, because it's just with our own filters and our own perceptions that we're creating those labels. A lot of people say, I want less stress in my life. I want to be less stressed. You know how to have less stress? To actually look at things and to say, okay, it's not the situation that's stressful. It's my reaction to the situation and reacting in a stressful way. So I think the quote is, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at changes, right? So it all comes down to that awareness of the stories that you tell yourself, the beliefs that you have, the assumptions that you have. It all plays a role. So awareness is key. Yeah.
I had to sneeze. I apologize.
That was quick.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. I think the good, bad, the binary of black and white, that's not how we live or experience life. Everything is nuanced and spectrum and gray area. And being able to be vulnerable and humble enough to express my experience in the world allows us to hear somebody else's and adjust what we're focusing on, adjust those reactions. Standing in the place of response versus reaction is emotional maturity, key to being a good leader. But being able to have that open dialogue about our own experiences gives people permission to have a dialogue about theirs. And standing in that space of non-judgment, like, I'm just here to understand, and I'm here in curiosity, and being open to opportunity allows you to grow in ways that you couldn't have predicted. Being so stuck on an outcome allows for tunnel vision, which can be really great for accomplishing things, but you lose a lot of opportunity along the way that was outside of that tunnel.
Totally. You're actually able to create more and be more innovative and have sustainable success when you have more of an open view of things. It's when you're limited, when you're focused on the short term, when you're just trying to get something done. Yes, it's good for the short term, but when you want to look at long-term success, you have to have a more holistic, complete view of what's going on. So
yeah, 100%.
Agree.
All right. Well, this has been a very lovely conversation, Natasha. I have enjoyed every second of it. For everybody out there, like we said, Natasha and I are both coaches. We focus in slightly different areas, but overall, a lot of crossover, I think. So my main focus is leadership development and the process through that communication and mindset, and really creating cohesive, strong, foundational, human-centered leaders so that you can show up for your team and allow them to show up in their genius. If you would like to work with me personally, I offer one-on-one coaching, company coaching, as well as co-founder coaching for relationship, to making sure that everybody is on the same page and strong. And Natasha, I will have you share a little bit about yours.
Yeah, my niche is around maximizing your performance at work and in life. So using your leadership capability so that you can bring your best self in every aspect of your life. So if you're interested in working with me, please send me a note on LinkedIn.
I will put the link to my website in the comments, and I am also available on LinkedIn, and I hope to chat with you all soon. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everybody.